Hi, my name's Antony Ward and welcome to this tutorial for 3D World magazine. Now what we're going to do in this first part of this three-part series is we're going to take this little robot guy here and we're just going to build a basic rig for him. Now this will be a rig that allows you to blend between IK and FK. The limbs will be stretchy so you can sort of stretch him out and deform him slightly, but at this stage that's all we're going to focus on. In part 2 of the series we will then take this basic rig and we will add more functionality to it and make it more advanced, and then in part 3 we'll take it a step further and improve on it even more, giving you more controls. Now, because this is a three-part series, don't be worried that at the end of part 1 you won't have a complete rig. You'll have to wait until you've done all 3 parts before you've got a complete rig. That's not going to be the case. Basically, this part will give you a basic rig which you can then use to pose and animate your characters absolutely fine. All we're going to do in part 2 is take that rig and enhance it, and then in part 3 we will take the result of part 2's rig and enhance it further. So at the end of each part you will have a usable rig that you can use on many different projects. So let's focus back on part 1. We have this robot character here, and what we're going to do is we're going to start off just by defining some basic joints, just building a skeleton. Now the skeleton is a foundation to any rig. Whether the skeleton is driving the mesh directly or whether it's driving other controls which then drive the mesh, you need some joints in there just to get things started. So let's start off and we're just going to jump in and we're just going to create some joints. So let's go to skeleton, create joints, open the options. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to let's reset the tool. I'm going to turn symmetry on across the x-axis, because what this is going to allow me to do is as I build the left arm, it's going to automatically build the right arm, and when I build the left leg, it's going to build the right leg. So if I jump into the front view, now all we're going to do is we are just going to create a basic, let's just close some of these down. We're just, at this stage, all we're after is a 3-joint arm. Shoulder, elbow, wrist. We don't, at this stage, want to worry about adding in extra joints for wrist twists, so that's deforming this area here as the wrist twists. As your arm does, if you rotate your own wrist, you'll see that the rotation travels all the way up to the elbow. And we're not going to worry about the bicep twist either. Again, when you rotate your arm around, you'll notice that your shoulder, it doesn't actually rotate on the pivot there. It rotates around your bicep. So we're not going to worry about those now. They will come later. And to be honest, this is such a basic character. He wouldn't benefit from those at this stage. But yeah, let's start creating some joints. So luckily we have these spheres, which are they're part of the design, but they're also helping us to define where our joints need to rotate around. So I can just create a joint on that axis there. Now I'm not sure where in here, but we can just have a guess the center of that sphere and do the same there. Now what you can do is you could, let's close that down, temporarily increase the radius, and that will help you get a better sort of visual representation of where that joint lies with respects to that sphere. So that's looking okay. Move that up like so, and then let's increase the radius on that one. Like that. So looking from the front, that's looking fine. So let's just jump back here for now. As you can see, we've built the left arm and the right arm is being built for us. So let's just go up to the top view So looking on that sphere, that looks fine. So we need to move this one. So rather than me moving this, if I move this now, you'll see the wrist joint moves. But if I press it insert, that will allow me to move this joint independently of the wrist. And now I can just go down and tweak that like so. So there we just have 3 basic arm joints. Now I'm happy with the positions, so I can now get rid of the symmetry constraints there, and I'm just going to fix the radius, move it back to, well, let's make it 1.5 just to make them a little bit bigger. So there we have the left arm and the right arm, and it's a good idea to keep on top of your naming conventions. So left shoulder, left elbow, right elbow, left wrist, just copy and paste that, right wrist. Now you could, if we'd have created the spine first and then we parent this shoulder joint to the spine, you could just use the mirror joint tool and that will create the right hand side for you. But for this rig, we're not having the main skeleton all parented together. Instead, we're having them all as separate elements. Now, if you were creating this rig to use in a game, then that wouldn't work because you would need it all to be one skeleton. But for anything else, this will work fine. And what it also means is you've got a cleaner rig to work with. Right, so we've done the arms, so let's jump in and do the same with the legs. So we're just going to use the spheres to guide us. One there, one for the knee, roughly about there. Then one for the ankle. That's a bit easier because that sphere is just nicely orientated with the world route. Go to the side view. And again, let's just increase that radius just so we can see where that is. And I'm just going to hide. So just to hide, just Control H. So I just want to move that so it's inside. That's about right. Let's move down to the ankle. The knee, sorry. And I think that looks okay. Just going to increase that radius just so I can see where that's sitting relative to that sphere. And again, move down to the ankle. And I'm happy with the way that where that center is because I can see there's a nice cross from the edges. Oop. So again, I'm happy with those positions, so I'm going to delete those symmetry constraints, set the radius back to 1.5, and then we're going to go back in and we are going to start renaming. So left thigh, left knee, and left ankle. Right thigh, right knee, right ankle. So that's all nicely done and all named correctly. So now let's do the same for the spine. Let's go to the front this time. I'm going to just double click and I'm going to turn off symmetry because obviously we're just working on the spine, so we don't need that to have another set of symmetrical joints. So I'm going to create the lower spine here because we've got this sphere and that'll act as the hips, so we can sort of rotate around the hips. And just like the arms and the legs, I'm just going to focus on 3 joints for the spine. So one there, and then we will create one for the upper spine there. We want another joint for the neck, and that's going to allow us to, basically rotate the neck. Because of the way the head is built, it's all just going to rotate around this neck pivot here, so we don't need any more joints in the head. Now you could create one in the middle here, and that will allow you to sort of bend the head and deform the head slightly. But we're not going to do that for now. Instead, we're just going to create another joint at the base of the antenna here, and then another one in the middle, and that is just going to allow us to bend the top. You know, if he's running or something, then you can add a bit of sort of secondary animation in there just to give it a bit of movement. So I'm just going to go to the side and just check that's up the middle. Yeah, that's looking okay. And I'm just going to double check the translate values here. What I'm looking for is anything different than in the X, because that will mean that each joint is off center from its parent. If I select this joint here and move it, you'll see we've got a value here, which means it's not directly above the parent joint. So again, let's select those and change the radius, and then we are going to rename it. So we want spine lower, spine middle, spine upper. We want one for the neck, and the bottom of the antenna, and then we want another one for the middle. Now we could create another joint for the top, but it's not really going to benefit. I mean, unless you want to put another joint there and then you can pull it around and stretch it slightly. But for now that's fine. Instead, what we are going to do is duplicate that lower spine joint, delete the hierarchy because we just want that one joint, and I'm just going to rename that to root. Now that means we've got two joints in the same place, but that's not a problem, because what we want is we want to be able to control the root joint, and that will rotate. It's rotating the upper spine now, but basically the root joint will rotate just the hips at the bottom, so you can give them a little bit of a hip wiggle, and then the spine lower will rotate the rest of the body. So we've got the joints set up. Now what we need to do is go in and fix the orientations. If I just make sure this is set to object, so as you can see here, the x-axis is not pointing down towards the elbow joint. We need the orientations to be correct so that the x-axis points down to the next joint. What this means is if you see when I rotate around the x-axis there, the elbow is moving all over because the axis is not correct. So we need to go in and fix these, so that we can, when we come to animate and we come to rig it, everything rotates the right way and everything moves as you would expect it to. So I'm going to select all the joints, go to display, transform display, local rotation axes, and that's just going to show me what they currently are. And as we can see here, we've got different ones on the spine. The right arm is different, and we've got the knees are different to the thigh and different to the ankle. So now we start the cleanup job. But it's quite easy to fix these. We are just going to go to skeleton, orient joint, and open that up. I'm just going to reset the values. So all we need to do, we're just going to keep the default values. We're going to change secondary axis world orientation to Z. Now if I select the root and click apply, that fixes this for us because we want Y facing forward, X pointing down towards the next joint. So if I rotate that now, you'll see that the elbow joint just rotates around that pivot, which is exactly what we want. Now the wrist isn't orientated correctly. I mean, ideally you want it to match the elbow and the shoulder. Now what we could do to fix that is just click on Orient Joint to World, and it will just inherit sort of the parent's orientation. Click Apply, and that's fixed. Now the problem we do have is that if we look from above, you can see that the orientation of the wrist, although it's matching the elbow, it doesn't match the orientation of the hand. So if we rotate the wrist, the hand isn't going to rotate around an axis, it's going to wobble a bit. Now we can quickly fix that, and by just duplicating that joint, we'll just make sure, now what I'm doing is pressing Control and Shift. We'll make sure that this is set to world, so I'm moving and manipulating things according to the world axis, sort of in world space, and I'm just going to move that out, and then I'm just going to parent, select the wrist and press P, parent it back to the wrist. So now if I click the wrist and we apply the same orient that we did with the rest of the arm, click Apply, you see that's fixed the wrist then. So now, although the orientation matches the elbow, it's now pointing down the wrist correctly, which is exactly what we want. So let's go over and do the right arm. Now if I apply the same principle as I did with the left arm, so we click Apply, and that looks fine. Now the problem is, ideally, I mean you could use the orientation it is now, but ideally what we want is when I lower the left arm, the right arm should lower as well to mirror it correctly. And that's just makes it easier for the animators really. They can just select the shoulder joints if they're working in FK, rotate them down, and then you've got the arms lowered. Now you're not going to match every orientation, but that's the one that's more commonly used, so it makes sense to try and mimic that. So rather than just using the same settings as we did on the left arm, instead we can just invert the secondary axis world orientation. I click Apply now, as you can see, Z is down and X is pointing down the bone, which is fine, but Y is pointing backwards, whereas Y is pointing forwards here. Now if you wanted to, you could go in and you could edit these manually and make sure so that X was pointing sort of the opposite way, and then that would give you a lot more sort of well, it would mean that more of the orientations would match, but for this guy this is absolutely fine. What this means is we can flap the arms like so. So we can just go in and we can do the same as what we did with the left wrist, just to fix that. Click Apply. That's X pointing down the bone, and that's done. So let's go to the root joint of the spine. Now I'm just going to set that to plus, click Apply. So we've got the orientations we want, except for one joint at the bottom, and I suspect that's the root joint. If I move that out of that hierarchy, let's just move that up here. Let's get rid of that. So that's right. So rather than mess about trying to fix the root joint, I'm just going to duplicate that lower spine and just recreate the root joint, just so everything matches up. Then put spine lower back under there. I'm just going to go up and check that they're all orientated correctly. Yep, that's fine. So let's go down to the leg, well, both legs. So I'm just going to click Apply, use exactly the same setting that I did for the arms. So we've got Y facing forward, Z pointing to the right, and X pointing down the bone. That's fine. Now because the legs are orientated the same way, we could just apply the same to the right leg. Now with the ankles, we're not going to do the same as we did with the wrists, because we want the ankles to be orientated sort of to match the world. So we want Z pointing forward X pointing left and Y pointing up. So instead what we are going to do is we are just going to unparent the joint. So unparent, and I'm just going to press G to repeat that command. And then I'm going to do inherit joint to world, orient joint to world on both of them, just to make sure. Now the left joint was fine, but the right ankle, obviously that needed fixing, and then just reparent it. Like so. So just going through, the ankles are right because they match the world orientation. The knees and the legs and the arms are fine. So there we have our very basic starting skeleton. And I think we'll probably end this video here. It seems like a sensible area to finish. So we'll end this video here, and then in the next video we'll continue on and we'll start to build in the IK, FK functionality.